Report.
Good evening, Steve Price filling in. Welcome to the show. Andrew Bolt's away for a couple of weeks and I'll be here for a couple of weeks. Andrew will be back with you in the new year. Now, coming up, another state premier, as we've heard all day today, bites the dust. Annastacia Palaszczuk follows Dan Andrews and Mark McGowan out the door, and the Elbows are now out to replace her. Two candidates are going to fight it out with an announcement due on Friday. We'll dig into the politics of all of that with Michael Kroger and Stephen Conroy in just a sec. A major Canberra shift from Labor on immigration, obviously aware that the public and the polls don't like the flood of migrants crowding major capitals, driving up rental prices in particular, and clogging up public transport and major roads. We'll dig into the changes and we'll ask why the Prime Minister wasn't there today making the announcement himself. And out of New York, I talked to a Jewish son whose both parents were snatched back on October 7 in the Hamas terrorist attack on Israel. His mother has been freed, but his 80-year-old dad is still captured. What a horror show. I'll talk to him soon. And more ridiculous climate change hysteria from Chris Bowen. A complete embarrassment for our country. But first, before I get to our panel, I'm sure they'll have strong views on this. In politics, it's sometimes what you don't do as a leader as opposed to what you actually do that matters. Now, there was a major announcement made in Canberra today on one of the hottest issues in Australia, and that's the level of migration. Poll after poll, talkback radio caller after talkback caller, letter writer after letter writer to the papers has made it very clear Australians believe we're allowing too many migrants into our country. Now, this is a nuanced argument, and it's not, as I have often been in the past, a question of around where migrants come from, although I believe we still need to have a tougher discussion about that. No, this time it is a numbers question. Now, I'll get to the detail and the debate around the big question in a sec, but I want to first talk about the politics of this. Senator Pauline Hanson, as I've already said, will join us later, but a simple question on the politics, the optics, if you like, of what happened today. At the biggest announcement of a major change to the way we deal with migration, certainly since COVID, when the border shut, and probably before that, the famous John Howard quote on "we will decide who comes to this country and how they get here." That was, of course, in response to Tampa and boat people. But I can't believe that today these changes were left to be announced by two Labor ministers, Clare O'Neil, the Home Affairs Minister, and Andrew Giles, the Immigration Minister. Have a look.
We are going to make sure that we bring numbers back under control, that we build a better planned system around essential things like housing, and perhaps most importantly of all, that we build a program that delivers for the national interest.
One that is good for workers because it's good for wages, good for business and good for Australia, operating in our national interest, enabling us to meet our challenges and seize the opportunities of the future.
Now, surely the Labor government's playing some kind of bizarre hoax on the Australian people. Either that or these two are not long for this world and this was a way to ease them out gracefully. I mean, how else can you explain how two people who were single-handedly responsible for the chaotic and, for many, traumatic release of 148 detainees, including rapists, wife bashers, pedophiles, druggies, you name it, and you allow them to stand up today to announce we're tightening up immigration regulations and cutting numbers? You've got to be joking. They shouldn't be running the Parliament House canteen, let alone getting their hands on anything to do with immigrants. O'Neil and Giles should be on the backbench after their dangerously ham-fisted handling of the High Court decision. Worse, in my view, for Labor and the increasingly collapse of any public trust the Albanese government still has, is my question, where was the Prime Minister? Now, surely this was a big enough issue that he could have delayed what has been reported today to be a holiday for a day or two to stand with his embattled ministers to make an announcement of this importance. Sure, he was out vaguely talking about the changes on Saturday, but it was Saturday and no one noticed. And given how many weeks he has spent outside the country and the delight he and his colleagues had bagging Scott Morrison over his Hawaii in the middle of a bushfire crisis, surely his advisors would be saying, look, PM, this is a big change. Cutting migration down from an absurd number of 700,000 in 2 years to less than half or so, they claim. But no, the Prime Minister and his fluffy white dog were nowhere to be seen. OK, so the bloke might need a breather. Everyone needs a holiday. but he should at least come back with some sort of plan, I guess, on cost of living. But he wasn't there. And neither was the acting Prime Minister, the hapless Richard Marles. He was missing in action also. And given the economic importance on immigration, maybe even the Treasurer Jim Chalmers could have turned up. But no, it was these two. It doesn't fill any Australians worried about borders and asylum seekers and refugee numbers any reason for confidence, does it? It says to me, maybe these two will pay a price down the track for the worst lapse in detention politics since Kevin Rudd lost control of our borders. Now, just before I get into the panel with Michael Kroger and Stephen Conroy, how about this fun fact for you? As of yesterday, what do all these people have in common? Scott Morrison, Gladys Berejiklian, Stephen Marshall, Peter Gutwin, Dominic Perrottet, Mark McGowan, Daniel Andrews, and finally, Annastacia Palaszczuk. Incredibly, at the start of the COVID pandemic, Morrison was Prime Minister, and the rest of those names during 2020 and 2021, the dark COVID years, were state premiers. And as of yesterday, every one of them has gone from senior public roles out of a political job. That's an incredible turnover of political talent, or lack of talent, depends where you stand, in anyone's book. And you've got to say it says a lot about how Australians felt that they had been treated during those dark COVID days. Locked up, masked up, forced to stay at home, banned from work, banned from even travelling more than 5 kilometres in Victoria, and in some states banned from playgrounds and golf courses, locked in our states, banned from leaving Australia. But what a list. Topped off by the Queensland Premier yesterday. Joining me first up today, Michael Kroger and Stephen Conroy. Welcome to you both.
Steve,
great to see you. Great to see you both. Michael, what about that list? In just a few years, all gone.
All gone. Well, mate, you've got to remember that it put a huge amount of pressure on those leaders for a long time, and all the health ministers. As you look at the health ministers and other ministers who were involved, most of them are gone too. So it doesn't surprise me. It was an incredibly difficult period. They were under a lot of pressure. They made a lot of mistakes. Nothing surprises me that.
So are they gone because they're now unelectable from what they did?
Well, part.
Except, I must say, Stephen, Daniel Andrews won an election off the back of that.
Fact-free zone here. Seriously, Steve.
Well,
Here's a news flash. Mark McGowan, Annastacia Palaszczuk and Daniel Andrews all won elections. All won elections.
How?
Because your view was not shared by the vast, overwhelming
my view that we were locked up
Western
too tight.
Australians. Yes. Okay, you've got you're back in Melbourne, mate. You don't have to stick to the Sydney media bubble. Okay, the Victorian public repudiated your position. The Victorian public repudiated your position.
Yeah, which is almost
the Queensland
impossible to
public
believe.
repudiated your position.
So we weren't.
The Western Australian
the public have now worked out
your position.
The public have now worked out that the politicians were wrong, overreached.
They're just facts, Steve. But all three of them.
I tend to deal with what people tell you when you talk to them.
Well, as opposed to what they do in the ballot box, which is in secret, where they don't have to put up with being hectored by people.
So you're of the same view as Dan Andrews, where he says in Victoria, the haters can hate and everyone else votes Labor.
Well, there was a record landslide majority for a premier going into a third-term election. He increased his majority, Steve. So
you don't think
his analysis is closer to the mark than yours.
You don't think Victorians had any issing with the way Daniel Andrews handled it?
There were plenty of things that people could be unhappy about.
Like playgrounds, not being able to go 5K, not being able to have your mother over for dinner.
I did 8,000 kilometres on my bike in a 5-kilometre radius. I'm still dizzy from going round in circles.
It sounds like
okay,
me.
But let's be clear. Andrews got an increased majority, Steve.
Yeah.
An increased
How would he go today,
majority.
Steve? The bottom line is the more people learn about what these premiers did in 2023, the more they've worked out that they completely overreached. They put demands and requirements on people that didn't need to.
So how come the Labor premiers won and the Liberal premiers all got defeated? Help me with this.
Of course people gravitate to governments during a crisis.
No, they didn't gravitate to
Liberal, Labor, left-wing around the world.
They didn't
governments tended to get re-elected.
Perrottet and Gladys didn't get gravitated to. Marshall didn't get gravitated to. Sorry, just some facts. Basic facts.
Why then is Annastacia Palaszczuk deciding not to contest the next election?
Because after the length of time she's been there, on average nowadays, the political cycle is much shorter than when we were younger, Steve. I mean, I think we'd all agree with that. That the social media world has changed politics in a way that, 24/7 TV changed politics, and the social media world has accelerated the pressures, the day-to-day controversies, the magnitude of those controversies. I think she was, and certainly the Queensland public thought she was, because they kept re-electing her. People underestimated her the whole time. And I think she's even had the final laugh on all of the haters, which is that she got out and didn't lose an election.
I guess one of the things that comes out of this, Michael, is it does show that Liberal oppositions in a lot of the states we've just talked about have been pretty useless.
Unfortunately, haven't been strong enough. I mean, Perrottet lost, by the way, Stephen, because that government had been in power too long. The government exhausted, and in South Australia, as much as I love Stephen, he wasn't perceived to be strong enough. But yeah, you have to, if you want to win an election from opposition, you have to stand for something. You have to distinguish yourself. You just can't follow the day-to-day news cycle. Rabbit up a tree there and a dog down a hole there. You've got to have some policies. You've got to take some risks. You've got to be prepared to make some enemies. And I think too many of our state oppositions have been too cautious for too long, and that's shown to be an election-losing strategy.
Who gets the job in Queensland?
Yeah, look, that's a good question. I think they've got three candidates. The right are running
probably
a candidate.
Just two. You'd think probably Fenton and Miles.
I think that if Cameron Dick wants to be the Deputy Premier and stay the Treasurer, he needs to stay in it until a deal's cut.
Stephen Miles he seems very sad all the time. He doesn't seem like a very happy chap.
I think Steve had a very tough job. As Michael just made the point, the health minister during that period. That was a tough period. And he was sent out to do a lot of the heavy lifting for Annastacia, so that Annastacia could get the balance right between being just, and so he was sent out to be the attack dog. Didn't make him the favourite of the Sydney media bubble or the Courier Mail, but fundamentally he did those hard yards.
Michael, can Christopher Woolley win up there?
He will win. He will win.
He will
win. If they put Miles in, Miles can't win an election. He's too close to Palaszczuk, too close to the old government.
A lot of baggage.
Hey, if they put Fenton in, she's got a half a chance. She's got a chance. But if they put him in, they're a goner completely.
We've got the issue of the Attorney General, Mark Dreyfus. We saw his behaviour in that media conference last week. He's confirmed there are no ongoing moves to keep someone like Benbrika locked up. Now, this is the bloke who threatened to blow up the MCG and Crown Casino. What I can't understand with this for both of you is he comes from Algeria, as I understand it. Why can't we send him back there?
Well, this is at the number the High Court made their ruling, and frankly, I don't agree with their ruling. So I'm being very clear about this. I do not agree with their ruling, but they have now created the new law of the land. They've overturned 20 years. And Benbrika has been released not because Labor changed any laws, but because though the existing laws are not being critical of the coalition when I say this. These are their laws. The courts are taking a far more interventionist approach. They are attempting to undermine the role of politicians who are elected by the people. So High Court judges are more and more interfering in what's known as ministerial discretion. Sometimes they crimp it a little bit by saying you didn't follow the proper process, you didn't tick all the boxes. But this is actually different. They've made a substantive change to 20 years.
So we can't get rid of this bloke. He's got a visa that if he leaves the country, he can't come back. But if he doesn't leave the country, he can stay here. Why are we letting a bloke who threatened to blow up Crown Casino and the MCG stay here at all? Can't we change the visa law?
Well, they should extend his stay in jail. I mean, Labor have completely lost control of this whole debate. They've lost control of the borders. Just to go back to a point you raised before, to have O'Neil and Giles out there today on immigration, two ministers with no credibility.
I mean, how does that happen?
Albanese's lost control of this whole thing. Any politically smart Prime Minister, Keating, a Howard, a Hawke, would have said, hey, listen, you guys have had a bad week. This is a major announcement which is causing huge damage to the government, having lost control of the borders.
I'll do it.
And I'll send my 9 and 10 batsmen in. Yeah. Number 9 and 10 in.
Even if you had Miles or Chalmers out,
he should have gone out. Of course, Albanese should have gone out, Steve.
Look, I mean, if you want to talk about, and we were just talking about a second ago, about the toll of being in public office now is a much shorter time frame.
Well, you're not saying Anthony Albanese is tired, are you?
No. What I'm saying is that the media demand that they turn up every single moment for every single day. That contributes to why
wait till he
a lot
back?
Of people, because this is something that the government wanted to deal with ASAP. I think they needed to make a change. I think they're should be applauded for making the change. And the fact that journalists believe the Prime Minister should have turned up isn't part of
I don't necessarily believe that, but he sent out the wrong two people. I mean, even if you had
portfolios. I mean, and to Albo's credit, and I've lived in an alternate universe, to Albo's credit, he is running a cabinet government.
He doesn't look as if he's in control of anything. He's not in control. He's never appeared once. Since this High Court case, he's not given one press conference about that issue. Not one. This issue, Albanese should have been out in front. The Prime Minister should be out in front on the big issues.
He's been in Parliament in question time, and he's answered the opposition's questions.
I wrote a column about this at the weekend on lack of leadership. Michael, great to see you. Stephen Conroy, thank you very much. Coming up after our break, we will talk Israel. They've issued a firm warning again now to Hamas terrorists. We'll get the latest, and plus Pauline Hanson will have her say on Annastacia Palaszczuk, plus the changes to migration. Welcome back. Talk to Pauline Hanson shortly, but let's go to the issue of the war in the Middle East. And one of the key negotiators of the initial ceasefire agreement between Israel and Hamas, Qatar, says mediation efforts are continuing to secure another arrangement. But there is a big but here. There is a narrowing window, according to those negotiators, and it comes as Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu calls for Hamas leaders to surrender and lay down their arms.
בימים האחרונים עשרות מחבלי חמאס נכנעים בפני כוחותינו. הם מניחים את נשקם, הם מוסרים את עצמם לידי לוחמינו הגיבורים. זה ייקח עוד זמן, המלחמה בעיצומה, אבל זה תחילת הסוף של חמאס. ואני אומר למחבלי חמאס, זה נגמר. אל תמותו בשביל סינואר. תיכנו, עכשיו.
And already we've seen images of hundreds of men stripped to their underwear, throwing down their weapons, it appears. Reportedly, Hamas terrorists were those men. And now a former Hamas cabinet minister has hit out at the terrorist organisation. Yosef Al-Massi, a former Hamas minister of communication, says Hamas leader Yahya Sinwar had set their cause back 200 years. And ordinary civilians in the Gaza Strip wanted to get rid of him. He's not the only one saying that. Have a look at this.
What resolution? Just give up and surrender. This is the act of idiots. He caused the death of his own people. Sinwar has killed his own people.
Joining me now is the Australian's Foreign Affairs editor, Greg Sheridan. Greg, that sentiment from a Palestinian, a civilian, very well put, but very brave.
Yeah, Steve, I think, the Palestinian population in Gaza probably hate Hamas now for what they've done. This is what Hamas wanted. It wanted the death of a lot of Palestinians to, blacken the name of Israel. I'd be surprised still if they ever formally surrendered. I don't think that's their style. They're more likely to commit suicide than to surrender, and they would also calculate that Israel is coming under tremendous pressure, and if Israel has to stop before the Hamas leaders are captured, then they will market this for future decades as a kind of a victory.
You've watched this area closer than most people. You don't get a sense, do you, that Israel's for stopping?
No, but they are under tremendous pressure. They are under tremendous pressure. And the other thing is, structurally behind all this is Iran. And who knows what is going to be in power, who or what is going to be in power in Gaza after this is over. But you can be sure that Iran is going to continue to pump money and material weapons and all the rest of it to the extremists, and it's got a big axis of influence with Hezbollah and the Yemeni, the Houthi rebels and the militias in Syria and Iraq. Israel will have to stop at some point, and then it will have to establish a new governance structure in Gaza. Now, I'm full of sympathy for Israel, but these are enormous, difficult challenges ahead of it.
Took the Americans years to find Osama bin Laden. Can the Israelis find this Sinwar bloke, and how dangerous is he?
Very good question, Steve. I wish I had a halfway useful answer for you. He is dangerous, but he's very, very dangerous. But the history of these terrorist groups is that knocking out their leader actually doesn't do much to disable them. Now, Israel is right to go after him. This man is a war criminal of the first order, and justice demands that he be captured and held to account. But having said that, just as when Osama bin Laden was killed, Islamist terror didn't end. When al-Baghdadi died, the Islamic State didn't end. If this guy goes, you're still going to get Hamas 2.0 or Hamas 3.0. It's everything the Israelis want to do is right, but I'm just dolefully saying it doesn't really solve the problem.
Just briefly, Nikki Haley, I know your view of Donald Trump. You've written it hundreds of times now, and you haven't changed, I don't think. Can Nikki Haley get that nomination?
I don't think she can beat Donald Trump, but if Trump is forced to withdraw, she is now surging ahead of Ron DeSantis. He's not out of it by any means, but DeSantis and Haley are battling for number 2, so that if Trump has to withdraw, or if he goes to jail or something, they would be there to, who was that ice skater who won the gold medal, Steve Bradbury or somebody, who just by standing, everyone else fell over. So that's what Haley and DeSantis are trying to do. She certainly has been the most impressive in the Republican debates, and she, she's got a great story to tell, and I think she'd be a very good candidate for the Republicans.
How much is crooked Hunter Biden hurting his dad, Joe?
Prodigiously. Americans profoundly don't want Donald Trump or Joe Biden. If I was just considering Joe Biden, I would say the case for voting against Joe Biden is overwhelming. Although Biden has been good on Israel. You've got to give him that credit. He's been very good on
and
Israel.
Solid, yeah. Yep. I mean, the UN is all over the joint. But...
And on Ukraine, really. But partly because Biden is an old guy, and old guys have better instincts on these matters than young guys. But the Americans don't want either Biden or Trump, but their primary system means that only the extremists in each party get to vote in what is effectively pre-selection. So the sort of most fanatical figures in the Republican Party want Trump, and Biden has the power of incumbency. He won last time because they couldn't bear the idea of Bernie Sanders. Dear God, that would have been, they would have lost for sure. So, but now Biden won't recognise that he's too old, Trump won't recognise that he's too mad, and that's the choice that we're left with.
What a great choice. Well, it was great to pick your brain, Greg. Thanks, you very much.
Thank you.
Greg Sheridan there from The Australian. Now, it really seemed like now or never for Premier Annastacia Palaszczuk to resign on her own terms. I mean, despite months of leadership speculation and polls saying she's going to lose the election, Ms Palaszczuk repeatedly insisted she wasn't going anywhere, and she was, quote, absolutely determined to lead Labor to next October's state election. Her popularity was in free fall. She didn't care about that. She said, I'm going to the polls. It's reported senior Labor figures urged her over weeks and weeks and weeks to reconsider her future. Joining me now, a very proud Queenslander, One Nation leader, Senator Pauline Hanson. Great to chat with you again. Is Queensland going to miss Annastacia?
Not at all. And I don't think they'll miss Labor either. It's just not Annastacia Palaszczuk, Steve. It's the whole Labor Party. And what they've done to Queensland since 2015 is terrible. They've shut down the fishing industry, the coal mining, the ag industry is on its knees, the hospitals have suffered, the ambulance drivers, the teaching, the education is a mess. The whole state is a mess, and we're over $100 billion in debt. So Labor needs to go.
And you haven't even mentioned the youth crime problem, which, if you're a Queenslander living in some of those Queensland towns so well up the coast, Townsville, places like that, it's dreadful. It's out of control. I mean, the government's supposed to keep the people safe.
It's the biggest issue throughout the state, Stephen. You're right. I'm sorry I didn't mention it, trying to rattle off everything that, and there's a lot more than what I did say. But the fact is that youth crime is out of control in the state. You've had over 10,000 arrests or charges that have been laid against these people. You've only got 306 beds for detention for these youths. They know that to be put a youth in detention is approximately $570,000 per child per year. And this is what's costing the Queensland taxpayers a lot of money. They haven't even got enough policing to deal with the issue. The police are over it. They are sick and tired of the court system. The judges give them a slap on the hand. The detention centres are not working. And we've actually now coming up with a policy and to actually deal with it with hard yakka, school bullying, to deal with it in the schools with school bullying. You've got to deal with these kids and you've got to turn them around. Don't return them to dysfunctional families again. These kids are just running riot and the public in Queensland have had a gutful.
I must say, from a distance, it doesn't seem that either of the two candidates who are likely to take over, Shannon Fentiman and Stephen Miles, would be any better. Miles has got a heap of baggage. Fentiman said today that she's putting her hand up. Here's what she had to say.
And I believe I am best placed to lead that change, and so will be nominating to be the next Premier of this great state. I have the utmost respect for Stephen Miles. We've been friends for a long time. We have different views on who is best placed to lead the party, and I think, you know, MPs this week have a really tough decision.
As a Queenslander, does she fill you with confidence?
No, she doesn't. Not at all. She's been Health Minister. And we haven't alleviated the problems in the health system at all, let alone all the other issues that we have. Stephen Miles, my God, what an arrogant, okay, I won't say any more than that. What an arrogant person he is. And he's like, he's never grown up. He's still in the sand pit. He's still in the sand pit, all right? And he's an arrogant prick, okay? That's what I think of him. And I've got no time for him. And the whole thing that the people of Queensland are woken up from what's happened with COVID. She kept us safe. No, she didn't. Because people now have reactions from the adverse side effects from having the COVID shot. Shutting down the borders, people couldn't see their loved ones, couldn't get in the hospitals. You know, aged people have suffered because of this. And the youth. Young men have suffered also by being forced to have this jab. So the people have woken up, they're understanding, and they want answers and they want strong leadership. Do I think David Christopher's got it? No, I don't, because he's moderate. He went along with her for the treaty and he was going to have a treaty in Queensland. So he's not the person either to lead the state. But you've only got a choice between Liberal Labor. Unless the people want to overwhelmingly vote for One Nation, well then you can put us in and I tell you what, there'll be a hell of a change in this state.
Well, they can vote for your Chief of Staff, but you might lose him. James Ashby, I understand that he's going to run as a candidate in one of those seats in Keppel.
He is. He's standing for Keppel, which is outside Rockhampton, and it's Central Queensland. Steve, Central Queensland hasn't been represented, or Central Australia or Northern Queensland hasn't been represented at all. I should say Central Queensland or Northern Queensland. They've been forgotten. They pay their taxes, they get nothing back in return. And the people, and this is what Annastacia Palaszczuk, and this is why Christopher Lee, he's concentrating on South East Corner. He doesn't care about North Queensland at all. As I said, the farming sector, the sugarcane growers, the fisheries, they're on their knees because of policies. I've never heard Christopher Lee talk about this. And, you know, the youth crime. You know, James has got some good ideas to make Great Keppel Island as like a boot camp for these kids to go to, where they have to really do it tough and they have to learn respect, self-esteem and get back on their feet. And instead of these detention centres. You know, we have got some good policies with it because the others have come up with absolutely nothing how to deal with this. And I'm so over Annastacia Palaszczuk, and I'm glad to see the back end of her.
You've always been vocal on migration policy. I'm sure you sat down and watched today the changes announced by two of the most useless ministers in the country who have completely screwed up the High Court issue. Do you have any faith that the announcements made today are going to make it better?
Too little too late, Steve. And people are screaming out about high immigration for such a long time and the impact it's had on our housing. There's a lot of things we need to address, and I've been talking about this for years. My policy is stop, cut back your your migration program. You know, they've got over 500,000. They've got 726,000 foreign students that have come into the country as well. That needs to be addressed. Stop foreign ownership of our housing in Australia. That's been my policy for a long time. I see now that David Littleproud has picked up another of my policies, as well as superannuation, putting it into the housing. That's all my policies. I've had it out there for years. They have no idea about where to go with policies to really understand the grassroots Australians and how they are suffering. So I think it's too little too late. I think Labor's on the nose. I think it's on the nose federally and in the states. People are starting to really wake up to what is going on.
You better send David Littleproud an invoice. Pauline Hanson, thank you very much for your time. Always a pleasure to catch up with you. Now, coming up next, the son of two Israelis. They were both kidnapped, his parents, by Hamas. He'll join us to tell their harrowing story of being held hostage in Gaza. You don't want to miss that. Let's turn our attention back to the war in the Middle East, following, of course, the Hamas terror attack on Israel back in October 7. Now, there are still 137 Israeli hostages being held somewhere in Gaza, and we've seen pictures out of Gaza today at how much damage has now been done there. But worse, Hamas has warned that none of them, and I repeat, none of them, will leave Gaza alive unless its demands for prisoner releases is also met. One of those hostages is 79-year-old Gadi Moses. Now, he was kidnapped from kibbutz near Oz on the 7th of October. That was the day of the terror attack, along with his ex-wife, 78-year-old Margaret. Now, Margaret was freed by Hamas during the ceasefire, but Gadi still remains hostage. Joining me now from New York, and I can't believe what he's been through, is Gadi and Margaret's son, Yair Moses. How are you holding up?
Very, very tough, very hard to hold up, yes.
You know, today when someone said it was the 7th of October, that is 2 months ago. It's such a long time, and when this terror attack happened and your parents were taken, I mean, I would have thought you would have hoped that there would have been a quicker resolution for both of them.
Of course, we hope so and wanted it to happen, but it didn't happen. Even my mother that was released was only after 49 days. She was in captivity. It's not something that happened quick. And my father now, it is already 65 days, more than 2 months that we know nothing about him. So yes, it's very, very hard. It's terrible, this situation. It's very terrible.
Explain to us, if you can, how you first came to find out that your parents had been taken from the kibbutz on the 7th.
Well, about my father, we know it because his life partner, Efrat, has updated that he was taken. She sent a message saying he went out from the safe room and told the terrorists that came into his home, take the car, take money, take me, leave the girls behind. Efrat Katz was there with her daughter Doron and two granddaughters, Raz and Aviv. Unfortunately, later another group came into the same house and took them too, and Efrat was murdered on the way to Gaza. Doron and her daughters were kidnapped and released after 53 days. About my mother, we just, around 9:30, we just lost connection with her. We didn't know what happened, and we didn't know exactly what happened. After the IDF came and scanned all the kibbutz, we know that she wasn't there, and so we assumed she was kidnapped with many others. And after 2 days, there was a video released by Hamas when we saw that she was taken by two terrorists from the kibbutz.
Yair, I wanted to find out from you what your mother's told you about her time at the hands of these terrorists that kidnapped her. But let's just concentrate for a moment on your father. No news at all at this time. Nothing from Israeli intelligence. No idea where he is. Are you fearful now that Hamas has made this threat that unless they get their prisoners swapped, then none of the hostages will get out alive?
Of course I'm afraid, because he's a person that is almost 80 years old. We know nothing about the condition he's held. Even if without the Hamas threatening what they just threatening, we don't know what they're doing to him. We know nothing about him. Red Cross never saw him. He's almost 80 years old. With him, there are more people in this age. There are others that are wounded, maybe sick, that must get their medicines, and many other reasons. Even for someone in his 20s to be 65 days underground, it's not it's very bad. So elderly people or people who need their medicine, it's unbelievable. You cannot even describe what they're going through. So we are very worried, even without what Hamas is saying. And of course, they're threatening now, and we don't know if they're meaning or not, because as we know, Hamas is so cruel, so they can say anything and do anything. So of course, I'm afraid and worried about him.
Tell me what your mother told you about her time in captivity. Have you been able to find out much from her about how she was treated?
Yes, my mother she had the medical situation that she needed a breathing device while she's sleeping, and she didn't have it there. So for 50 days, she barely slept. In the beginning, there was a doctor that seen them, and she was sent with another group of elderly people that need some more medical care or something like this. But there is nothing there. And the solution he gave her when she said, I cannot lie down and sleep because I might die from it. So he told her, okay, sit on a chair and lean your head back and sleep like this. And I guess you understand it's not the way to sleep. So she barely slept, only for a few minutes from time to time, all these 50 days that she was there. Now she's a bit getting better. Finally, she was able to sleep very well, because here back she got the device, her color is back to her face, and slowly she's getting better physically. But the trauma is, of course, still there, and to take a long time to be able to live with, let's say it like this.
Yes, I was going to ask you, what do you think the long-term effects may be on her? I mean, post-traumatic stress disorder would be something that I would expect all of these hostages are going to now feel.
Everyone in Israel will have this and will have to deal with it in some day. I'm sure I will have to do it too. Currently, I'm not available for it because I'm worried and trying to fight for my father. And this is why I'm in New York now. I was here with the delegation of families, and we met many people. And just so important to put awareness, and this is why I'm talking to you now, that releasing the hostages must be number one goal for everyone, not in Israel, for the world, for humanity. Because what was done in Israel, it's not human. And everyone which has some humanity in him needs to understand that this must end as soon as possible today. Yesterday, 2 months ago, it has to end, and they must go home. And there is no doubt, no other option. This is what every human being needs to think and to know. It's not something that happened 2 months ago. It's something that is still happening. It's an ongoing thing. For us, it's a living hell for more than 2 months.
You're in New York, the home of the United Nations. You must have been extremely angry to hear the UN's opinion of the United States and Israel when it came to that vote in the United Nations where America abstained and stuck with Israel. You must be really angry about how some of the rest of the world is reacting to what's going on there.
Yeah, putting Iran as responsible for human rights it's the same, not serious, because, I don't think it needs more explanation. So, yes, the UN, again, also is a big disappointment because it's supposed to be for everyone, it's supposed to be humanitarian, but it's not. It's not doing what it's meant to be, to make sure people that were kidnapped from their home need to be home. I don't know of any other country in the world that would agree that something like this will happen to her. More than 10,000 missiles were shot on Israel in the last 2 months. And luckily we have Iron Dome, but not all of them did it. And so many bombs, so many people kidnapped, so many people murdered. I'm not familiar with any country in this world that disagrees that something like this will happen to her, and it will sit still and say, okay, please bring them back. I'm sorry, I don't know what to do. So what Israel is doing now is reacting for attack happened against it. It's not something that Israel started. And it's doing whatever it's need. Israel is doing whatever she needs in order to bring her people home. And I believe each country will do the same.
It's an absolute global disgrace that anyone could defend a terror outfit like Hamas that kidnaps babies, beheads women, rapes young girls, and in your case, kidnaps your parents. I feel very sorry, Yoyi Moses, for you and the situation you've found yourself in. Stay strong, and thank you for joining us from New York. Well, back home now, and Australia's teacher shortage crisis. So you can't believe that a country as rich as Australia has a shortage of teachers, and it's going to get worse, we're told. Schools across the country are struggling to fill not hundreds but thousands of positions around the nation. Many students are being forced to go back and learn from home, and we know during COVID just how bad that was for the youngsters. Now, today, education ministers around the country met. They're going to apparently try and thrash out solutions to the crisis. You had the Queensland Education Minister actually suggesting that we give out free degrees and tax cuts for new teachers. I would have thought there might be some more sensible ideas than that. Joining me now is Shadow Education spokesman Sarah Henderson. Great to catch up with you again, Sarah. Are free degrees and tax cuts for teachers the answer?
Well, Steve, good evening, and terrific to join you. Look, I think what we've seen today from the education ministers is that they have absolutely no plan. Certainly the Albanese government did announce some initial reforms to teacher training, which were very much building on the work that we had done. But as the Senate inquiry called on just a couple of weeks ago, they need to be urgently fast-tracked. The bottom line is, Steve, student teachers are leaving their courses in droves, and teachers are leaving their courses, leaving their schools in droves as well, because they are not being supported in the classroom, including by evidence-based teaching methods. They are being left high and dry, and we're expecting some big solutions to come out of the Education Ministers' meeting today, but unfortunately we saw absolutely nothing.
Why do you think teachers are leaving in droves? I mean, I can understand that there has been over probably the last 5 or so years an argument, and education is largely the states are in charge. Are we not paying our teachers enough, or are they feeling that the industry itself is not a profession that is going to be rewarding enough for them? Are they frightened about some of the things happening in the classroom? Sarah, what should we be doing?
Well, Steve, Australian parents know with 1 in 3 students failing NAPLAN, we do have a serious crisis in our schools. That is an appalling result. So the Coalition's focus is very much on raising school standards. But teachers deserve much better support, and that's at the hub of the problem. They're going into the classroom, they're not prepared by their university courses, which frankly are doing a woeful job, and some of them should be defunded. They're doing such a poor job. So teachers don't get the support they need from the university training they receive. And of course, the government has also done nothing about classroom disruption. We are now 71st worst country in terms of classroom behaviour. So teachers are being set up to fail, and urgent reform is required, and that's why I was expecting so much more out of the Education Ministers' meeting today. There was a very good report handed down, a report chaired by Lisa O'Brien, who runs the Australian Education Research Organisation, made a whole range of quite significant suggestions, but we've seen nothing by the way of positive response from the government.
We see, the issues in the city schools. I mean, obviously in places like, Western Sydney and Western Melbourne, there is issues with classroom behaviour. But when you go further out into the regions, which you know so well, out into the bush areas of Australia, I mean, they must be doing it really tough trying to attract teachers and retain teachers in some of our country towns.
Absolutely, and that's why when we were in government, Steve, we implemented a really important scheme for teachers in remote areas. So they have HECS debt relief, which has been an important driver for those teachers seeking to teach in the very remote parts of Australia. But there is no doubt, there's no real area where this is a challenge, but certainly classroom disruption is a massive issue. And as one young teacher said to me who left her job after 5 years, I did not go to school to have chairs and tables thrown at me. So not nearly enough is being done to support teachers in the classroom. And frankly, one of the big recommendations that the Senate inquiry made, which of course was chaired by Liberal Senator Matt O'Sullivan, was to introduce a behaviour curriculum where students are expressly taught how to behave, the standards that need to be set, and teachers are getting that support. So much is not going right in our schools, and we saw that again last week with the PISA results, the Program for International Student Assessment, where nearly half of all Year 10 students are failing to meet minimum standards for reading. So we have a grim situation. Urgent reform is required, Steve, and it's really disappointing we haven't seen that from Education Minister Jason Clare today.
Sarah, just briefly, what do you make of these reports that pro-Palestinian students from the University of Melbourne are being urged to wear traditional Palestinian scarves at graduation ceremonies this week?
Well, Steve, it's absolutely terrible, and I've been very outspoken about the importance of protecting Jewish students. Their security and safety in schools and at universities is a real issue. We've seen an alarming rise in acts of anti-Semitism across our country and, frankly, across the world. It's very, very concerning, and that's why I wrote to the Vice-Chancellor of Melbourne University yesterday asking for assurances that no student will dress in any sort of protest regalia, which of course has already meant that some Jewish students will not be attending their graduation. One mum said to me just yesterday, my son will not be going to his graduation. He's a Jewish student. He won't be going on Wednesday because of this sort of horrendous stuff that is happening.
Oh, how sad is that? It's awful. Sarah Henderson, always nice to see you. Thank you very much. Now, coming up after the break, the so-called racist royal scandal continues in the UK, and British Prime Minister Rishi Sunak finds himself in hot water. Welcome back. Steve Price with you. Chris Kenny coming up. Let's go to the UK now. Now, this Omid Scobie's hate-filled royal expose, so-called expose endgame. The fallout from that continues. There's been more allegations, including now that the late Queen Elizabeth's been dragged into. Now, according to Scobie, the Queen had offered Meghan Markle her Ghanaian-born equerry to help adjust to royal living and learn her royal duties. I mean, this stuff really is pretty turgid. Multiple royal commentators, including Scobie himself, have now accused the royals of, quote, having very little racial diversity. Joining me live from London, we speak to her on a regular basis to discuss is writer and broadcaster Esther Kraku. Esther, great to see you. Is anyone taking this book seriously?
Clearly not. I mean, the British public want to hear from Omid Scobie as much as we would like a bout of gonorrhea. And he himself has proven that he is very inconsistent with the stories that he's been telling. So apparently he has admitted that the wrong copy of the book somehow made its way to the publishers. But the only thing that was wrong with that copy was the fact that there was apparently the revelation of the names of the royal racists, which now apparently the Queen has joined that club. It seems like there's more people in the royal family that's allegedly racist than are not. But obviously, if we were to take this story at face value, it actually shows that the royal family are very much not racist. So the Queen offered her Ghanaian-born equerry of mixed racial heritage to Meghan to offer his services to her to help her adjust to royal life. I really don't understand how anyone could take offence to that, unless, like I've been arguing from the beginning, the Sussexes really treated the royal family and any advances that they made towards them with extremely bad faith. But again, this is assuming that we take anything that's coming out of Omid Scobie's mouth seriously. I do still think it's very strange that the Sussexes have not made any public statement about this book, denouncing it in any way, shape or form. Maybe they think this is the time to hold a dignified silence after having Netflix documentaries and Oprah interviews and tell-all books released. But I just think it's very strange and very damaging and very unfortunate.
What has, Esther, been the wider British public reaction? I mean, we know what the media reaction's been. We've heard, people like Piers Morgan slam this bloke. But what's the wider public view of this been?
Well, mainly one of bewilderment that Omid Scobie has even managed to drum up publicity in the way that he has. You have to remember that this is someone who's reported on the royal family for over 2 decades, but he was very much an outsider amongst royal journalists, commentators, and people really in the know. And somehow he has this proximity to the Sussexes, and he seemingly knows everything that's gone on in the palace, even though we don't know any of his sources, and we don't know whether anything that's coming out of his mouth is based in reality. So most people are just bewildered by the fact that we've even heard of this person's name, and obviously they don't really believe anything that he said. I mean, Piers Morgan publicly denounced one of the blatant lies he told in his book, that he took 3 phone calls with Queen Camilla, even though Queen Camilla doesn't take phone calls, at least of all from Piers Morgan, because it's just not the done thing. So most people are not taking it seriously.
I reckon... I reckon you can probably throw that book on the scrap heap. Esther, sorry it was so quick for us tonight, but we'll catch up again next week. Coming up to Chris Kenny, he's on the road tonight, live from Queensland State Parliament. Make sure you stay tuned.